Hello, and this is Dustin DaHusky, and kind of want to talk about something that is maybe infrequent or frequently seen in the fandom between individuals, between different regional communities, of course, with state communities and even perhaps international communities. And I kind of want to talk about things that you're not really expecting, or, well, yeah, exactly that, not what you expect. Um, or expectations. Let's say this is going to be a video about expectations of things. Um, Here's just one that I just noticed from, here and there from across the country, across the world, either if it's local, regional, state, national communities, they'll have their own expectations of what they think about their individual communities or at a specific level, those mentioned. Sometimes when they talk to out of state, out of local, or out of regional furs that try to end up visit different parts of their state, their communities overall. And sometimes people will not sugarcoat things and say, hey, this is what to expect. It's not perfect. Expect expect some oddities. Expect some idiosyncrasies within a community. Honestly, this paints a fairly fair. This paints a fairly realistic image about a community, but it shows that you're willing to accept that it has faults, and that you're going to tell someone ahead of time that yes, it's not perfect, but person's willing to accept these imperfections to show realism, which is kind of admirable because a lot of people tend to prop their local, regional, state, national communities on a pedestal, which can either excite people or disappoint. And when people tell me or ask me about my community, and I kind of tell it as it is. I tell it as truthfully as I can to tell them what they will actually expect. And you know what? When they visit, they know exactly what they're expecting. But if I tell you that it's all, perfect and, everything is fantastic and whatnot, and then they kind of experience it for themselves, they're going to see it's not always perfect. Um, which, been in this fandom for a while, your expectations are quite low. There's very, very few things I am excited about what people describe. When I hear people describe something, most cases it's within their own personal experiences, but they probably haven't really gone out of familiar territory, let's say. That happens. When you've seen multiple state communities, regional communities, whatnot, you can pick the stuff that works and the stuff that doesn't, and then you try to make your community better or to avoid certain things. Sometimes it's okay to downplay your local community as something that isn't fully perfect because let's be honest, furries are just like regular people. We're not always perfect. And the better you can understand that, the better you're going to actually better appreciate what's in your community. Because then when you say everything is so perfect, you're either pretending that it is and you understand that it's got faults, but you're too proud to say so, like, to pretty much admit it, which Milwaukee's not perfect. But then some people in Madison say their community is better than Milwaukee, and having been to both and having experienced both, they're on par for the course. Neither one of them has come short, but neither one of them has actually topped the other. They got issues, and they got strong points. I'm just going to say it as that, because to say which one is better than the other is, you're going to lie about one or the other, and me, I'd rather knock it down to both even playing fields, that both communities strive at something good, and then suck at something else that they're too proud to admit. Or at least in Milwaukee, we're at least not proud to admit, but we're going to admit we're not perfect. Even sometimes Chicago furs can tend to put themselves on a bit of a pedestal. That back in the day when I was trying to make a cooperation between Downers Grove, Tivoli, this is back in 2013, so not the previous staff that has ran Tivoli Bowl since 2016. I'm going to talk about the previous management of that meet that kind of put their community on a pedestal and says, Kenosha? No. Life is only meant for Chicago, for area only. We won't do anything outside of Chicago. It doesn't frankly exist to us. And like, oh, okay. And then we propped up Madison. So, yeah. Propping up a community is, while you can have pride for your community, don't make it so like it is the best thing out there, because someone's going to walk in from the outside and say, you do this and this and this perfectly, but what about that? You're lacking in this. You know what? There's always a fault to something. It's one thing not to dwell on it, but it's something to think about. Something that you're not expecting to do so. Something that is not thought of until someone makes a mention of it. So as far as like regional, local, statehood stuff, there's always expectations that people think they currently have, and to a certain degree, that expectation is certainly true. There's some things that are perfectly true about a community. But to say that if one is totally perfect from the other is hogwash. No community is going to be anything better than another, because there's always some form of issue to a community. Even the most perfect community out there has some faults. Even major community or pillars of the community or members of the administration of a community can certainly say they've built up a good community. But deep down in their mind, they know that there could be some improvements. So, and also talk about some forms of community is organizations, meets, stuff like that. And having been a state representative of Wisconsin furries for 3-4 years, until I've had to not really step down. I kind of abolished my own position. I was, another story for another time, actually. Back in April of 2012, I was voted not third party, not fourth party. I was fifth party voted in. Like, I was a total write-in ballot, where I took 80% of the vote to become the next Wisconsin state representative. And it pissed off the other 4 people that did want to run for it, and then I just happened to get voted in. People seemed to thought I knew something about running stuff. And I sort of didn't. I just learned along the way. But there's one thing I did learn about my time as a state representative to much of the Midwest. Is that is a lot of work for one person to do. past or present or future. Big organizational organizations within a state community is going to be tough to implement, as I've discovered. And so far, I was the only one to successfully do this. And on my own, without any help, and really just doing this on the fly. I did it pretty good. Brought people together, brought communities together, pretty much brought Wisconsin furries into the modern light. I can be humble, but at least I'm not going to shortchange myself about that. I have brought much of this community into the light in the modern age. As far as organization is concerned, I've at least paved the way for that future that we're currently living in the state right now. So, bragging aside, now back to being humble Husk. I discovered that this whole bigger picture thing is hard to run and hard to sustain. And eventually, the smaller picture becomes more important. That I've realized. That's why I've abolished the state representative of, the furry community of Wisconsin. It's because all the people that came up to me that wanted to take over when I've just kind of felt worn down by it. A lot of the individuals that came up to me wanting to take my place were all the wrong people. These were people that saw it as a means to elevate their social standing. Certainly wanted the type of influence I naturally cultured, which if you know me personally over the years, you know that I'm a precious bean. I've never really used anything to my advantage. I just simply became who I am and showed people that only. Never really used my status, my influence as a means to change who I am, which even to this day, long-time furries from long ago say, "Oh, Dustin, you haven't changed a bit." And this is going back a friendship of 8 to 10 years, sometimes 12. Good example of a furry that has never changed for nothing, and for anyone. I am true to myself, and this is the pretty much, well, how you see me now is how I usually carry myself all the time. Just how I am. But eventually, this huge organization does wear you down. I saw it only as a job. I was pretty much, what's his name? What's his first name? But it's McNamara from Ford. How he created the Ford Falcon, he only did it because he knew he had to. He wasn't going to give it glitz. He wasn't going to make it fancy. He wasn't going to make it complex. He was going to make it as simple and cheap and uninspiring but normal as he could build a car. Instead of going the whole 9 yards on something for the very first time, he literally just decided to, hey, you know what? We're not going to go 110%. We're only going to do 100%. You could, but it may be wasted effort. Well, big pictures tend to be not overexpressed, but too much expectation of something to happen, and often enough sometimes it doesn't come to fruition. Often enough for those that may have ulterior motives. Sometimes people might do something for social standing, or for power, or, get their names out there. I see this across the whole fandom over the years, mostly in the last 10 years. Last 18 years, first 8 years before 10 years, It's confusing. I haven't seen a whole lot of that. A lot of people were just very, very true to themselves, very, very humble, kind of carried on from that era. Not to say that braggarts existed in the furry fandom before 10 years ago. They did. But there were few and far in between. And a lot of people were just real. But I see people try to climb a social ladder that is certainly there. The ladder was certainly given to me. I just ignored it. I pulled a total McNamara on, yeah, I could keep going up, but I don't need to. Sometimes you're better off quitting while you're on top than on your decline. So I did that. So the expectation that, at least back then, when furry communities, state communities were still small, a major organization umbrella, if you will, is totally possible. Because there weren't that many furries back then. The more furries you end up picking up along the way, well, that bigger organization fractures. It has to. Eventually, a state has to self-divide slightly, not as a full separation, but just more of a subdivision of local regional identities. It happens. It's not a bad thing. When I created Siwi Furs back in April of 2016, people thought I was kind of dividing the state, when actually really it helped pave the way for more regional communities. So in a sense, it worked pretty good. It's not that we want communities divided. That's not the expectation. We just know that bigger picture groups, organizations, entities, they start to lose their focus when you have a bigger number of people to put under their umbrella. And often enough, not much gets done from that. Just because it's big. It's quite impossible to encompass it all in under one roof. It's hard to. Some people have the expectation to do exactly that. And unfortunately, that's not always practical. Sometimes you're better off downsizing, downplaying some major organizational things in order to think efficient, think small. Because eventually, bigger entities, yeah, they can certainly exist, but they might slow down the advance of smaller communities, smaller events. And some people just like to do things independently. You gotta accept that. That's something that's going to happen. Someone who has been at the tippy top of things, even I understood that. And you kind of have to let it go. Sometimes you gotta swallow your pride of making something big as you could possibly make it, and then before the big decline, losing it. If someone is a Rush fan, and if you get that reference, you get a cookie. You come to me to a con, and you tell me that you got this reference from this video, I'll find you a cookie. Then I'm going to forget this is going to happen, and then someone's going to tell me, cookie. Then I was like, oh, that's right. So expectations. There are big expectations out there, and some expectations come to fruition, and it's great. It may not be totally perfect, it may not be totally hitting the mark, maybe 80% out of 100, but hey, if it works for the most part, hey, you know what? Some expectations can actually be brought to life. Amazing. Some expectations are maybe a bit too high to hit. Sometimes things, not to say they're not meant to get off the ground, but sometimes maybe a bit too lofty, a little too high. That's another Rush reference right there. Oh my god, I love Rush. So those kinds of expectations, as far as so we talked about regional kind of expectations of stuff. Now we're talking about organizational type stuff for communities. So maybe let's talk about individual expectations. And I think this whole video is supposed to point out that don't believe everything what someone says. Don't even believe what I have to say, because you know what? Sometimes it also could be hogwash. But this is just my own experience from the last 18 years. I've seen quite a bit, at least in the local sense, I've seen it for the last 10 years. So individual sense. Individual expectations, whether local or broad. When people tell you expectations about an individual, yeah, you could probably perhaps believe it, but I'm always of the perception that, you know what, sometimes you're just better off meeting the individual first before you make, an assumption. Sometimes you're better off getting to know someone, even though people make an expectation of something or someone, sometimes you're better off experience it. Much like my first point about communities, you're better off experiencing it for yourself and see what it's all about. And sometimes people, when they tell me about individuals, some of it could be true, some of it could be false. Sometimes the expectation of seeing something to be true turns out to be false can be a bit damaging. Hearing about certain things about individuals in the past, long ago. Furries that actually aren't really, some furries that are still part of this fandom, and some who just kind of just disappeared. Individuals that tend to be either off the rocker, and you have to kind of get to know them to really not make that assumption, but fair judgment. Judgment may seem to be a harsh term, but when you actually get to know someone long enough to get to know them, and people say, hey, this person's just a wacko, and then eventually you get to see that, well, you could say that because you finally get to actually see who they are. Sometimes you just got to get to know someone, even if someone tells you, hey, Razok. Now, it's back in 2011, 2012. I was talking to this one husky in Iowa or Missouri named Razok Husky. Really good individual, as I thought. Although he's kind of a bit unstable. And some locals, good friend of mine, Juno, kind of told me to watch out after this guy. It's like, all right, it seems like an okay guy, but yeah, okay, all right. Didn't think too much about it. I thought, well, how bad could he be? Once you get to know him, yeah, he doesn't seem so bad. And then he kind of got a bit insane. Insanity to the point of being uncomfortable. So that's why they were trying to warn me. Of course, it's through their experiences, they're trying to warn me. I can understand that. I can appreciate that. It's sometimes nice to make your own mistakes by which you would think you'd listen to someone, but sometimes you just gotta find out for yourself. Maybe this whole video is more the point of you're better off doing something and just kind of see how it turns out, and it may not be what you're expecting. That should be the point of this whole video, actually. And then some individuals are like, oh yeah, well this guy's kind of boo. It's like, oh, I've been burned by this person. Yeah. So sometimes you tend to trust some of your friends when they say stuff. You don't want to believe it. You certainly don't want to believe it because you feel like, hey, you want to give someone a chance. You want to actually learn for yourself. And then you realize, oh shit, they were right this whole time. Could have listened to them, but I didn't. It's no one's fault. I was curious. So, really, expectations. At this point, which, again, expectations is, as far as I can tell, it's something of short supply for me. I don't really expect anything until I experience it. I kind of go into a situation on a neutral level, on a neutral basis. Kind of just absorb the situation, the environment, and just kind of go about on that. When people tell me, hey, oh yeah, you're going to have fun with this, I'm like, okay. I don't know if I can take your word, but I'll give it a try. Doesn't hurt to try. That doesn't hurt to experience something. Until you do, and then only then can you make an assessment to what you find. Then you can say, well, this person said this, and it was kind of true, but, this, I noticed this, and they didn't say anything about that. And one thing about this one topic, and it's with every community. There's not a single community that does not have one. Even in Seaweed, people across the state of Wisconsin call it Dustin's clique. I don't think I have a clique. At least from my perspective, I don't think I have a clique. To other people, they say I have a clique, but do I have a clique? No, I don't have a clique. But cliques. Yeah, you can certainly notice them. Sometimes it's best to ignore them. Maybe sometimes you're better off not ignoring the people, because it's maybe not the best thing to ignore people fully. But people see cliques as a negative thing. Sometimes you're better off ignoring the fact that there could be cliques. Although, you could certainly sense it. But you should always go into any community with an open mind. Yeah. If you really think Siwi is just Dustin's clique, well, I can't really change your mind until you really come on over after the pandemic and just hang out with us. Hey, we're probably not as cliquey as you think you are. And you know what? I can say that, and you don't have to believe a single word I said. Because you know what? You should certainly come over and check it out yourself. It's the same with Madison, where someone tells me, "Oh yeah, there's no cliques. It's pretty welcoming." Yeah, it's quite welcoming for the most part. Some individuals that might give you a cold shoulder, but that's most communities I've ever been to. I felt a cold shoulder in about every community I've ever been in. By a few people. You know what? Totally normal. With that, you find people who you get a warm shoulder to hang out with. So don't ever let cliques get in the way of getting to know people, even new people. You can certainly make new friends anywhere you go. In fact, my first time going to Laugh in 2012, you know what? People were all in their own little cliques. When we all went to Buona Beef, you know what? I mingled with every single group there was there. Totally new face. None of them ever knew who I was before I showed up. My first time there. Totally alone. I asked, hey, is this the laugh group? Like, yeah. And I was like, oh, I know this is going to get really, really awkward. They don't know me. I don't know them. So you know what? Water's cold. I may as well thrash around to make it warm. Don't know if there's any clicks out there. All I know is there's furries. Furries everywhere in this restaurant. Hey, you may as well get to know people. And I did. And sometimes, without knowing the fact that you may have broken several clicks just by hopping between one group to another, you know what? Hey, why not? It's actually the most fun I've ever had. It's my very first big furry group experience. The first 5 minutes, I was totally awkward. Wasn't certain how to really go about getting to know an entirely unknown group of people. And I was still relatively unknown even in Wisconsin at this time. This is January of 2012. So, you're only active for 2 years. People don't really know you. Still unknown. None of the people in my states today have even been known even back then, so it's totally different animal back then. And you know what? I said, fuck it, I'm not from the state. I'm just gonna make myself known. And I did. And then people were like, oh my god, it's Dustin. Because you know what? I made such a great impression. It's like, oh, this out-of-state person. This weirdo. Oh shit, he's really nice. Hey, you know what? You break expectations. Sometimes expectations are just bullshit. Because you don't know what to expect in the furry fandom. Back 18 years ago, back 10 years ago, back a year ago. You know what? Sometimes expectations are literally bullshit. And what people expect you to believe is also kind of bullshit because you're going to make your own decisions anyway when you experience them. Because you know what? Sometimes you're just better off, experience. Which is interesting in the fandom because I will say this. You don't need experience to do much in this fandom. I'm going to tell you that right now. You don't need much experience. But you do gain experience of what works and what doesn't over time, which only makes things easier. So, what about that experience? That's also kind of bullshit. Sort of true. Like, to be making the same mistakes that other people have in the past, it's good to know not to do, and sometimes you don't have a chance. You don't have a choice. You don't really have anyone to talk to. You just kind of do it anyway. So, what do people expect? Anything. So, you know what? Expectation in the furry fandom. You just got to experience it for yourself. And you just kind of have to put your best Pete forward and hope for the best. And when you hear that something might be too good to be true, I wouldn't put 2 full Petes in Dreamland just yet. It could be a false reality. Could be a reality that may not happen, or it could be the best thing to ever happen to people. So, in that case, always keep your mind open, because that is going to help you get through a lot of this, especially all the new furries after this pandemic is over. Oh, crunchy. There's going to be so many new furries that are going to experience the fandom for the very first time. Oh my god, this is another great reset for certain things. Oh my god, this is going to be fun for the next 2 years after all this is done. Not fun that I'll get to see someone struggle, but it'd be fun to see someone experience the fandom for the very first time. And a good reset helps maybe experience some of the stuff I used to experience back 10 years ago, because stuff changes. I think it'd be fun to see someone like me back 10 years ago and see that from the outside perspective for the first time. Could be interesting. Because really, it took me 2 years before I finally got really, 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 really active. Locally. And you know what? I was active around, I just kind of didn't do anything. It's kind of like with pandemic now, you really can't do anything. But you're about, and you're around. You don't know much of what's going on, but you want to. Hey, you know what? That's something you gotta figure out for yourself. Because no one else is ever gonna tell you something right. Because they're always gonna try to sugarcoat something, and there's too many people. No, there's too few people like me that won't sugarcoat stuff. Because I don't believe any of that. Because I want to make sure people at least understand what's going to happen, instead of telling them what's going to happen and then realize it doesn't exist in that plane of reality. So, yeah, expectations. Whether if you want to believe them or not, that's something you have to figure out. So, you know what? This is Dustin DaHusky, and hopefully I've blown your mind a bit. Probably not. Probably not at all. That's okay. Maybe. Nah, that's okay. So, see you guys next time.